Hi, my name is Alex, and welcome to the Catholic Disciple, where we take some time to slow down and reflect on the works of God in us and our efforts to follow Him and love our neighbor. Today, I want to talk to you about establishing a daily prayer routine. I already spoke in another video about why you should pray every day. Now, I would like to offer some thoughts on how to establish that routine of praying every day. I'll give some recommendations on the length and frequency of that prayer time, and I will touch on some other foundational points that should help you approach your daily prayer life with the right mindset and remain faithful to it. First, I would like to touch on the question of what do I mean when I say daily prayer time? I'm generally referring to prayer set aside for yourself to pray alone to God, ideally in a quiet place where you pause your day and make some space for God. I know some people have the opportunity to attend daily Mass, and I think if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend that. That can be a great foundational element of a solid prayer life and a solid life with Jesus. But I think even if you can make it to daily Mass, I still believe that all of us need some time set aside for just us and God, time outside of Mass or any other gathering of prayer with other people. I would also like to touch briefly on the question of motivation, why it's important to spend time daily in prayer. We see Jesus himself in the Gospels going off on many occasions to pray to his Father in secret. And also in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells us that when we pray, go to our inner room, close the door, and pray to the Father in secret. I do have another entire video on why daily prayer is necessary for the disciple of Jesus. If you want my full answer, I recommend you go check that out. But to summarize, essentially, the reason that we should take time every day for prayer is to engage in our relationship with God and to receive His love, His healing, His mercy, and His transformation. We should pray every day to receive the gift of God and return to Him the gift of our love. So to get into the more practical questions, I'd like to first touch on how often we should pray. St. Paul, in one of his letters, says that we should pray without ceasing. At first, praying without ceasing sounds daunting. It seems like more than we could ever actually do. But I will say that that can take many different forms. I don't think Paul is necessarily asking all of us to go sit in a corner by ourselves and only pray and never talk to anyone else and only live a life in the corner praying to God. That's not really what he seems to mean. Praying without ceasing could take the form of just a general awareness of God's presence all throughout our day, in the same way that someone who's married, when they're home and their spouse is home, might have a general awareness of the fact that their spouse is present in the home, even if they're not actually interacting with them at that time. But to look at this from a different angle, the Catechism states that we cannot pray at all times if we do not pray at specific times, in order to strive to meet the goal that St. Paul sets, and in order to have a healthy life as a disciple of Jesus. We need to set aside time every day for the Lord to work in our life, for us to be with Him and for Him to come to us, to engage in this relationship, to receive His grace and show Him our love. So if we need to pray every day in order to be a healthy disciple, that leads us to the next question. How long should I pray every day? On this point, I would like to offer you a quote from the book The Fulfillment of All Desire from Ralph Martin. On this point, he says, St. Francis de Sales has very specific advice for people involved in the world of work and family, advice that may surprise us. Quote, set aside an hour every day before the midday meal. If possible, early in the morning, when your mind is less distracted and fresher after the night's rest. Don't extend it for more than an hour unless your spiritual director expressly tells you to do so. Francis is writing for business people, laborers, soldiers, government administrators, housewives. people with the whole range of worldly responsibilities. To me, this seems like a pretty solid goal, about 1 hour of prayer every day. Though I think, in my experience, I find it better to recommend to you a range of time for prayer as your goal. I think the ideal range of time for daily prayer should be somewhere in the 30 minutes to 1 hour range. The amount of time that you can realistically spend in prayer is going to vary a lot based on your circumstances. If you are a single person with no significant responsibilities outside of maybe work and maintaining your place of living and seeing friends and things like that, you can probably spend more time in prayer than someone like me can. Someone with a few young children at home and a house to maintain and a marriage to nurture. So it's going to vary a lot. No person's situation is going to be exactly the same. I think we should all be realistic in the amount of time we can spend in prayer, but also strive to be generous with God. Additionally, I would say if you do not currently have a daily prayer routine, you're going to need to build up gradually to that 30 to 60 minute range. I'll give some more specific advice at the end of the video on what to do based on your current daily prayer life. But for now, I think it's just good to keep in mind that we should work to build up gradually, aim for that 30 to 60 minute range, and at the end of the day, I think also pray to God, asking for His guidance on how much time He wants us to spend in prayer. We can certainly ask for His guidance and wisdom to help us determine, based on our individual circumstances, what makes the most sense for us and what the ideal offering of time to God would be. To give you an example of my current prayer routine, which has admittedly changed a lot over the years, currently I aim to wake up early before my children wake up, and I try to get in about 30 minutes of prayer time in the morning before everyone else wakes up. I find that works best for me. The morning has always been my ideal time to pray. Additionally, about half the time, my wife and I manage to pray night prayer together after our children go to bed. And then we usually have some sort of prayer together before we go to bed ourselves. And additionally, mixed in throughout the day are various brief moments of prayer where I may ask the Lord's help with something, or I may thank Him for something, for a gift that He may have given me, or just a moment where I think of Him and remember His presence with me. The next point I'd like to touch on is expectations for this time of daily prayer. I think a lot could be said on this point, and I hope to touch on this in more detail in another video, but I thought it would be worth mentioning at least briefly as I recommend to you setting up your own daily prayer routine. If you're new to this, if you don't really have much of a prayer routine in your life at this moment, or if you've never really prayed on a regular basis, you may come in with a wide variety of expectations of what that prayer time is going to look like, how it's going to go, what it's going to feel like. It's easy to assume that prayer time with the Lord may be full of insights and good feelings and blessings and joy. And I will say that sometimes these things come, but these things shouldn't be expected to happen every time you pray every day. I think most people who have been praying on a regular basis for a long period of time will tell you that for the most part, it's a mixed bag. Some days are more interesting, so to speak, than others. Some days in prayer can be pretty boring. Sometimes it feels like you're really trudging through. Sometimes it's very hard to stay faithful or to keep going, or you may be tempted to just end early or go do something else that's more interesting. Or you may be tempted to just kind of sit there and read a book and call that prayer, even though you know deep down you're not really praying anymore. So there are lots of expectations you may come in with. I think at the end of the day, we shouldn't focus too much on the tangible things we hope to get out of prayer. Really, what we're hoping to receive in prayer is the gifts the Lord wants to give us, primarily the gift of His divine life and the gift of transformation and healing from our sins. And those gifts are much harder to see or to notice. It's not always obvious when we are receiving the Lord's help, whenever we are growing in virtue or moving further away from our sinfulness. So it's good to go into a daily prayer life with the expectation that some days are going to be boring, some days you would rather be doing something else, some days you may think it's pointless. But it's more a question of staying faithful, because we know the Lord wants to meet us here in prayer, and we know He has good things to give us in this prayer time. And He will, if we remain faithful, if we give Him that time and that space to work. I think it's also worth mentioning something about discipline. Establishing a daily prayer life is going to require being disciplined with ourselves. It's going to require some self-control. In order to be a disciple, you need to live a disciplined life and not just go down the easy path, the convenient path. We need to strive for self-control and endurance. We need to run so as to win the race, as St. Paul says. But despite requiring a substantial amount of discipline, maintaining a regular prayer life also demands patience and gentleness with ourselves. The Lord definitely expects us to put in the work, so to speak, but He also knows that we will inevitably fall short. Whenever you fall, whenever you skip your prayer time or forget about it, or whenever you stay up too late the night before and sleep in, whenever these things happen, just keep getting back up. I believe the Lord will not judge us on the number of times we fall down, but on the number of times we fall down and refuse to get back up and keep walking. God isn't looking for us to fulfill some sort of contractual obligation where we must put in a certain number of hours of prayer or else we're not going to get into heaven. That's not what He's looking for. He's looking for a loving relationship with us. To give a human example, when you have a relationship with another person, there are occasionally times when you need to cancel plans. Sometimes something comes up, or sometimes we just forgot. But a good friend will understand, especially if this is a rare occurrence. And on your part, if you are being kind to yourself, you won't beat yourself up when this type of thing happens. You'll just do your best to reschedule and show up the next time. Now, if you do happen to miss your prayer time for whatever reason, I think there are a few different ways you can respond to that. First, you should see if you can just make up that prayer time later in the day, even if it means that it's not quite as much time as you normally would have spent in prayer, or even if it means it doesn't happen in exactly the same way. Maybe instead of listening to music on the drive to work, you can sit in silence and pray instead. Or maybe you can pray while you do the dishes or some other type of housework. You could also see if maybe you could pray a little bit extra tomorrow to make up for it. But regardless, be at peace. Tell the Lord you love Him and do your best to get back up on the horse and keep moving. And make sure that you stay faithful the next day. Now, if you are regularly failing to make your daily prayer time, I think there are a few different questions you can ask yourself to get at the root of what may be going on. The first question you can ask yourself is if you are perhaps biting off more than you can chew, if you are setting too high a goal for yourself, if you went from one day praying for 5 minutes every day to the next day attempting to pray for an hour, and that is just perhaps too overwhelming, and so you end up doing nothing. There could be an element here of adjusting your expectations and coming up with a more reasonable goal for your daily prayer time. And that might be a good place to start if you feel like you're just consistently missing that time. Perhaps you've convinced yourself that for you, you need to spend 45 minutes every day in prayer. And perhaps based on the stage of life you're in or your circumstances, maybe 45 minutes is unrealistic, and that's preventing you from doing something. I would say it's better to keep some daily time of prayer consistently than it is to every so often make an hour of prayer. but not pray then every day. Another question to ask is, perhaps you're just not serious enough about establishing a daily prayer life. This really comes down to a question of motivation. If you're not really sure why you are trying to pray every day, you might need to revisit your motivations and spend some time thinking about why daily prayer is important. As I mentioned earlier, I have a whole video on that topic. If you want to check that out, that might help firm this up in your mind a little bit and give you the motivation you need. And to continue our example from earlier, in a friendship with another person, canceling plans is something that needs to happen occasionally. But if you're chronically canceling plans, that behavior will eventually wear down on the strength of that relationship, and it will certainly make it difficult to continue growing in that relationship. This may be a question of asking yourself how much you truly value a relationship with Jesus. Another question to ask is whether you might be better off praying at a different time of day. I know for myself, I find it easiest to pray in the morning. I like to start my day with that prayer time and use that as the foundation of my day. But I know that not everyone is a morning person. Not everyone will be able to get up extra early and get that prayer time in. Maybe you're better off praying at night, and maybe that's part of why you're struggling to maintain that daily routine. Maybe you're trying to shoehorn that prayer time into a place in your day where it's not really going to fit very well. This is ultimately a question of understanding yourself and your own tendencies and habits and preferences and how you best function in the day and where that prayer time is going to fit best for you. I can't answer this question for everyone, but I would just encourage you to reflect on your days as a whole. Take a look and see if you can identify a spot in your day where it would make most sense to put your daily prayer time. It's probably going to work better if you try to pray at the same time every day for the sake of maintaining that habit. If you try to say, well, today I'm going to pray in the morning and then tomorrow I'll pray at lunchtime and then the next 3 days I'll pray right before bed, it's going to be very difficult to sustain that daily prayer life. Another thought is perhaps you need some sort of accountability system to help you stay faithful. Maybe you would benefit from an accountability partner, someone else who will agree to pray at the same time as you every day, whether it's someone who lives in the same house as you or just perhaps another friend that you contact regularly and you can keep tabs on each other and help each other stay faithful. Maybe you need lots of alarms and reminders. Or maybe what you need to do is identify another regular piece of your schedule and latch your prayer time onto that other established piece of your routine. Sometimes it's easier to combine a new daily habit with an existing one, to pair them together and do them at the same time or one after another. For example, maybe you wake up every morning at 6 a.m. and make yourself a pot of coffee and read the news. Instead of reading the news, maybe make that your daily prayer time. Or maybe do your prayer first and then have your coffee. If you think that might be useful to you, take a look at your current daily schedule and see if there's maybe some other regularly scheduled part of your day where you might be able to join your prayer time to that other part of your schedule. That might make it easier to stay faithful to it on a regular basis. As we come to a close here, I would like to offer a little bit of practical advice based on the current circumstances you may find yourself in, where you currently are with your daily prayer life. To start, if you currently have no regularly established prayer life, I would encourage you to start small and manageable. I would say probably aim for 5 minutes a day, maybe 10 if you think that's doable, and establish a defined period of time for which you are going to try to make that prayer time every day. For example, maybe say I'm going to pray 5 minutes every day for a month. Or maybe say I will use the season of Advent or the season of Lent to establish a new prayer routine. And start with that smaller, defined window of time. To start small and manageable. Focus more on consistency and faithfulness than length. For those of you that already have something of a daily prayer routine, but perhaps you know deep down that you should probably be spending more time in prayer every day, or perhaps your consistency has not been great and you want to work on being faithful more often, I would encourage you to work on gradually building yourself up to that ideal range of time of prayer every day, that 30 to 60 minute range. If, let's say, you're on average spending 10 minutes or 15 minutes in prayer every day, maybe add 5 minutes every day for a week and aim for 20 minutes every day. And then the next week, aim for 25, something along those lines. Work on building yourself up gradually until you get to that point where you feel like you've hit the sweet spot, where you're praying as much as you think is suitable for you based on your life and your circumstances, and where you think the Lord is most pleased with your prayer life. If you're struggling with the consistency side of the equation, I would just encourage you to actively spend some time thinking about why you are struggling to be consistent with your daily prayer life. Perhaps revisit some of the points I made above about what to do if you're regularly missing your prayer time. There's probably something concrete that you can target and work on. If it's important enough to you to increase your consistency on your prayer life, I'm confident you can take a look at what's going wrong and identify some piece of your routine that's probably not working very well and work to develop a plan to change that and become more consistent. And for those of you that are essentially already doing these things, you're already praying for a substantial amount of time every day and you're maintaining a level of consistency and fidelity to that daily prayer time, I would encourage you to remain faithful. Don't give up the fight. Keep running the race. Remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And ultimately, to reach heaven, we really need to persevere to the end. Keep doing your best to love the Lord and be generous with Him and perhaps find new ways to serve Him. But whatever you do, just keep walking, just keep praying, stay faithful, and love the Lord. In closing, I want to leave you with this point, that God can never be outdone in generosity. Avoid thinking about your prayer life in terms of hitting the bare minimum. Our prayer life with God is ultimately about a relationship, and there's really no upper limit to love. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus tells us the following: "Give, and gifts will be given to you. A good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing, will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in return be measured out to you." The Father is always generous with us, but in a way He returns the generosity that we show to Him. Our measure will be His measure. God will see our generosity and raise it and give us much more than we have ever given Him. So I encourage you, be generous in your attempts to pray every day, in the amount of time you choose to spend every day in prayer. God will always reward us much more than we can ever think or imagine. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I pray that the Lord would bless your attempts to establish a daily prayer life, and I pray that He would use that prayer time to bear much fruit in your life. May God's peace be with you.